some of the mainstream media, keyword some, but some of the mainstream media is now starting to come around on the things you and I have been saying for months and months. The Hannibal Directive. Now, if you're a regular viewer of my show, then you know I discuss the Hannibal Directive regularly. Within like a month or two of October 7th, we knew that the IDF had used the Hannibal Directive. Hannibal Directive basically says that if someone is taken hostage, then the military, the Israeli authorities, will kill the hostages, the hostage takers, and basically anyone nearby. All of the above. It's just a free-for-all of murder. That's what it is. I'm sure they use more words, but it could basically say Hannibal Directive equals free-for-all of murder. And we knew this. We brought it. I brought it to you. Other independent media brought it to you. And it's been widely documented. There are even a couple of newspapers in Israel that have admitted it, including Haaretz, even though Haaretz initially claimed it was a conspiracy theory or something, but they eventually came around. But now you even have some mainstream media outside of just Israel that are admitting this. Here's from Consortium News. They do great work. And they're talking about Australia's national broadcaster, ABC. And yes, it is confusing because there's ABC in the United States, but this is ABC in Australia, and it is like the biggest news network in Australia. They featured a story reporting that the IDF had indeed carried out the Hannibal Directive, killing untold numbers of Israeli civilians on October 7th. And of course, when they cover this, they act like it's breaking news. We have uncovered that the IDF, and if you're like me and you see a report like that, you're yelling at your TV screen. We knew it for months. For months. We've been covering this for months. And here they are like, apparently something called the Hannibal Directive. That's my Australian accent. And I also brought you a clip like a month or two ago, probably two months ago, of Piers Morgan. Like, who was it? Was it Low Key or I can't remember if it was Low Key or George Galloway. Someone brought up the Hannibal Directive on Piers Morgan. This is like a month ago. And Piers Morgan goes, I've never heard of that. I don't know what that is. And it's like, have you been reading any of the things that isn't mainstream media? You've never heard the term Hannibal Directive? Ridiculous. To continue, though, he says in the Consortium News article, they regurgitated several reports in Israeli media dating back as far as January, which revealed the use of the doctrine interpreted as a license to kill Israeli soldiers being taken hostage by the enemy, but also apparently killing not just Israeli soldiers, but civilians that are not soldiers. And then he points out that their delay in covering the Hannibal Directive, their delay is facilitating genocide. Like, the delay is part of making sure this can continue. He says, the story should be viewed as an example of establishment media's propensity for begrudgingly giving a nod to demonstrable facts only when needed, like long after it would have been pivotal in the story, in the propaganda, in the reality, because the lie becomes the reality. That's the biggest problem here. The lie becomes the reality. If it is told well enough and long enough, the lie becomes the reality. For a lot of Americans, for example, Russiagate is fact. Like, Russiagate actually happened. For a lot of Americans, they sit there thinking it's real because they've just heard that lie enough over long enough that it becomes true to them. And this also goes, I'm not saying that just to like defend Trump. This also goes for a lot of things Trump says to his supporters. They just start to believe it. Some of them believe that Kamala Harris is a Marxist. That a far-right lunatic, pro-war lunatic is a Marxist. They've just heard that term said enough that they believe it. And so the lie becomes the truth. The article continues, the belated reporting of Israel's use of the Hannibal Directive 11 months into a genocide reveals a qualitative difference between a passive and subservient mainstream media. They are bootlickers. That's what our mainstream media does best. Anyway, an active and vital independent journalism earnestly working in the public interest and in accord with the Genocide Convention, a UN legal instrument that demands states take steps to stop genocide from occurring. So the difference, he's saying there's a difference between the passive and subservient mainstream media and what is actually required by law. Technically, there is international law saying these mainstream media outlets are required to help stop genocide. So they're breaking international law. Now, of course, that doesn't mean anything to them because that's what the U.S. does. It's what U.S. media does, it's what U.S. government does, etc. The ABC story avoided pointing out that Israel falsely blamed Hamas for killing 1,400 civilians. Initially, initially they said 1,400. That was the original inflated figure. Then they revised it down to 1,200 as part of a disinformation campaign. That figure of 1,200 killed solely by Hamas is still routinely reported. The lie becomes the fact. It's routinely reported as fact. Kamala Harris mentioned that lie. She didn't call it a lie, right? She called it the truth in her debate the other night. She said Hamas brutally killed 1,200. We know for fact, and like I'm saying, it's been reported by mainstream media to some degree, by Israeli media. We know for fact Hamas did not kill 1,200. Hamas killed a portion of that 1,200. We may never know how much. Anyway, the numbers get cagey, but we know for a fact it's not 1,200. Other elements of this propaganda included false accounts of dozens of babies beheaded, or ripped out of the womb, cooked alive in ovens, systematic rape, and horrific disfigurement of women by resistance fighters. All of that has been disproven. These stories, devised by Israeli military and political figures and laundered by mainstream media, helped whip up an orgy of hate and revenge and frenzied support within Israeli society for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's biblical injunction to commit genocide against an occupied population under siege. Okay, so let me bring you another example of mainstream media finally caving and revealing some little bits of the truth about what's going on in Israel, what Israel's involved in. Here is ABC News, and I'm not going to play their video, but just the title, you know what's going on here. Rotten to the core. Inside the Israeli and IDF system of incarcerating Palestinians. Rotten to the core. The day of October 7th, we already knew that Israel had 5,000 Palestinian hostages. That was the number before October 7th. 5,000 Palestinian hostages, roughly. People that are completely innocent that they've thrown into the prisons. And we knew that. And it hasn't been covered at all by your mainstream media. And then here we have finally, just the other day, September 4th, ABC covering inside the Israeli and IDF system of incarcerating Palestinians. So, major revelation for the mainstream media. These kind of things, it only took them 11 months, but they were like, what? I don't think these Palestinians are treated very well when they're in the prisons in Israel. But very exciting that you even get this little bit of coverage.